Hi everyone, welcome to this training session. My name is Maria Piangelino from WSP, and today I will be presenting the enhanced process for document maintenance relevant to the MRB and MCHW documents. I will deliver this presentation with my colleague Rebecca Shefford. This training is targeted to technical authors in SCS in national highways. There are two main objectives for today. Rebecca and I will provide the training for the document maintenance process, including why we are doing this, so the rationale behind the new process, the three components of document maintenance, the associated benefits, some of the key dates for you to remember, and the available support. And the aim of this presentation is also to provide visibility and early trials for tools that will be launched officially towards the end of March this year. Before starting the presentation of the document maintenance process, it's useful to set the context for it and look at the standards governance process that was introduced last year. You're all familiar with the concept of categories of change, A, B, C, and D, and you can see on the screen the three different flows of governance stages depending on the different categories of change. Document maintenance represents the last stage in the governance process, as you can see on the screen with the boxes in green. And this is the focus for today. So what I will do today is to present to you what happens once a document has been published and how we can make sure that documents are kept up to date. The agenda for today is provided on this slide. I will start explaining the rationale behind the improvements made to the current document maintenance process, so why we are doing this. I will then clarify the three components of the new process, and I will be talking to you about document review management, feedback management, and routine change management. I will then outline the benefits of this enhanced process, key dates and available support, and I will finish this training with some closing remarks. Let's start with the background on why we are doing this. The graph presented on this slide has been heavily used in RIS1 to represent the status of the DMRB. The solid line represents the number of DMRB documents, and the dotted line represents the average age of documents. You may notice that just focusing on the DMRB, so not considering the interim advice notes, in 2015 there were about 300 documents, DMRB documents, that were published. And the average age was significantly high, about 15 years old. In some cases, it was even about 30 years old. So in RIS1, there was a lot of work done to reduce the number of documents as well as reduce the average age. So by March 2020, the average age of documents was 3 months. After the successful delivery of the future DMRB in RIS1, now, in RIS2, National Highways has an obligation to keep the DMRB up to date, assuming a 5-year review cycle to keep the DMRB up to date. Around 20% of documents should be reviewed and updated as needed each year. With 164 DMRB documents, that means roughly 33 documents should be reviewed each year. Or in other words, we should have about 8 documents per quarter. To meet this target, the rate of update should be increased by a factor of 4, because historic data shows that in the past, only around 5.7% of documents were reviewed each year. An enhanced process for document maintenance was considered essential to complete the evolution of the DMRB efficiently and effectively. And it would also be relevant to keep the MCHW up to date after its overall refresh in RIS2. To expand on the previous slide, it's also useful to look at the distribution of documents among disciplines, as you can see on this slide. Keeping the DMRB up to date may pose challenges to some of the disciplines, particularly those who have a high number of documents to be reviewed. Let's see, for example, structures or sustainability, safer roads, drainage, and also considering the parallel work that is currently undertaken to refresh the MCHW. So to meet the RIS2 obligation of keeping the DMRB up to date, we have reviewed the current practice for reviewing and when needed updating documents, and introduced the good practice to help technical authors manage and prioritize their reviews. Over the last year or so, we have received feedback from different sources, reviewed and addressed this type of feedback. Firstly, during the training sessions on the standards governance process, which were delivered in March-April last year, comments were made on the opportunities for improving the way in which documents are kept up to date, to provide more visibility of documents to be updated, as well as help prioritization and management of feedback received. So those were some of the comments we received from you, from technical authors and also from TSC chairs. We also collected your comments on the status of document maintenance process from a survey that was circulated in September last year. And in parallel, we have also undertaken a lean exercise to see areas for improvement. Gaps and issues we have identified are outlined on the following slide. We have identified 3 gaps in the current document maintenance process we would like to address through the enhanced process. Firstly, there is no structured process in place at the moment to undertake and record the document reviews. Experience with the DMRB has shown that if documents are not regularly reviewed, they become out of date, which was the situation back in 2015. And it can then become necessary to rewrite entire documents, which is disruptive for document users and software providers producing design applications that need to be aligned with the up-to-date documents. Instead, when carried out correctly, document review management helps maintain stability and continuity for the users of the documents and reduce the need to rewrite whole documents. And if regular document reviews are carried out, documents can be efficiently kept up to date, primarily through small incremental updates and corrections to specific clauses that don't involve a complete redraft. The second gap we found is that there is no formal process and tools in place to collect and manage feedback. I'm talking about 3 issues here. Firstly, in terms of quality of information. At the moment, there is the standards inquiries inbox, which is used to collect feedback from different sources. But the way in which the type of feedback collected significantly varies depending on the senders, and there is no structured way of providing feedback. So the quality of information can also be very low. There's an issue of tracking feedback. So technical authors receive feedback coming from standards inquiries, but then there may be several feedback items received, and there is no structured way of collecting such feedback, tracking the status of them, and helping technical authors to manage their workload and prioritize actions. And consequently, there is an impact on the timeliness of addressing feedback. So without a process helping technical authors, some of the feedback items are not reviewed and addressed as soon as possible. And these may cause problems, particularly when we are talking about errors identified, not corrected, which may have an impact on safety. So if feedback is not managed and addressed, errors can go unchecked and the consequences can be serious. The third gap we identified is about the lack of a consistent document maintenance process in place, a structured way that helps to helps link document reviews, feedback management, and routine changes. So what I'm talking about here is a cohesive process that helps provide the information needed to prioritize and plan document maintenance actions so that documents remain up to date. So what we are trying to address with the new process is effectively to provide such a cohesive document maintenance approach, which draw together these three items, document reviews, feedback management, routine changes within the same process. And I will be talking to you about these three components in a second. So the components of the new process are provided on the next few slides. The first thing I'd like to highlight here is that when we talk about document maintenance process, we are talking about a set of activities to keep documents up to date and compatible with the policies and objectives of the overseeing organizations. This comprise document review management, feedback management, and routine changes management. Importantly, there are no significant changes to current practice. What we are doing here is to rationalize and enhance what we've got already in place, whilst introducing tools that can help better visualize reviews and updates, as well as track and address feedback received. The first item I will present is about document reviews. A document review is a scheduled activity to check whether a document is up to date and to identify the need for routine changes to bring it up to date. In other words, a document review provides the evidence that documents are up to date. We have introduced a template which is called Document Review Checklist. And this template will help you to assess whether a document is up to date or not. This is normally completed by the National Highways technical author or delegated to the authoring team as relevant. And it will contain a checklist which provides drivers and opportunities for change. So when you go through this list, you will find questions like, are there changes to European or UK standards and legislation? Of course, if the answer may be yes or no, but if the answer is no, that's fine. It means that there are no changes made to the legislations relevant to your document. But if the answer is yes, it means that it's useful for you to keep a note that there are changes to be made to your own document. And there are similar questions about changes made, for example, to policy, changes made needed because there is a feedback received that has to be addressed. So what we expect here is that you will be completing this checklist, and this will help you decide the outcome of the document review. Or in other words, whether as a result of that, there are no changes needed to the document or whether changes are needed to your document. So this in short is what the document review will provide. But importantly, document reviews do not include the drafting and governance of routine changes needed as a result of the review. So a document review is considered completed once you have completed the checklist, recorded the outcome, and then created the relevant change item on Jira, which will help you keep track of the relevant changes to be made to your document. So, but a document review, when it is completed, will be recorded into the system on Jira and will help you understand when the last document review was undertaken and plan for the next document review. In the next slide, I will clarify the timescale for document reviews and what's the appropriate way of managing them. Looking at the timescale for doing document reviews, the general principle is that there is a maximum of 5 years between successive document reviews. So in principle, if you've done your document review in 2023, the next one should be done by 2028. However, it's important to highlight the concept of successive document reviews. That the presumption here is that you have already undertaken a document review, but because we are introducing the concept now, you have to consider the next bullet point, which says that if you have a new document and you have to do the first document review, this has to be completed a maximum of 4 years after the first publication. So if you have, if we consider the documents that were issued in 2020, quite a lot of them were actually published in March 2020. It means that by March 2024, such documents have to have a document review. The reason why it is 4 years and not 5 is to enable subsequent changes to go through governance and publication in time for this 5-year review cycle, because it's the first time that such documents will go through a document review. They have been published from the scratch in a way. Once a document review has been undertaken, then we are following the first rule, which says a maximum of 5 years between successive document reviews. Of course, document reviews may be carried out at any time before the required deadline, and we'll see an example of that later, because in reality, we know that many documents have to go to review by March 2024, having been the document published in March 2020. So bringing the document reviews forward is very beneficial to avoid the peaks in the workload and many document reviews to be done at the same time. But I will show you an example later on in this presentation, a practical example. The other aspect to bear in mind, which links to the opportunity of undertaking a document review before the deadline, is that if you're planning to do a major revision of an existing document, and if you plan, and there are several changes to be made anyway, then it would be most appropriate to include a document review in this activity. So rather than waiting the deadline, if, for example, you have published your document in 2020 and in 2023 you're doing a major revision or you're reviewing several clauses, then that is the appropriate time to also do your document review. So after 3 years, let's say, from the publication. But again, I will show you an example of that in the next few slides. On this slide, we have summarized the JIRA process for document reviews. So effectively, this is the workflow you will see on JIRA when initiating a document review. The system will prompt when document reviews are to be done. So the technical author will decide to undertake a document review. At that point, you will then be able to move the flow into the next stage, which is in document review. And then based on the assessment you have undertaken, you will then decide whether changes are needed or not. So if changes are needed, you will then go down into the flow. You will list the proposed changes which are contained into the document review form, the checklist that I showed you earlier. And at that point, the document review will then be considered completed once the proposed changes are entered into the SRP. So effectively, in order for a document review to be considered completed, you have to create the relevant change item, selecting the relevant category A, B, C, and D, and you will submit the request as you currently do to enter the standard review program. At that point, you will then move into the change ABCD workflow, which will allow you to process the relevant change to your document. If instead there are no changes needed, it means that the document review form has been completed and will flag and confirm that no changes are needed to your document. You will then update Jira to say that no changes are needed, the document is up to date, and then the system will automatically reset the next date for a document review. And as I said, for successive document reviews, it will be 5 years later. So the system will then prompt the next stage, which is document review completed with no changes. And for your information, when a document review is completed but no changes are needed, the document version number will not change. So there is no increment to the version numbering system. Jira instead is updated to reflect that the last review has been undertaken and what's the date of the last review. And at that point, the system will also automatically create a new item in Jira with the due date in 5 years. And that will end the flow for document reviews.
I'm now going to talk about the next component of document maintenance, and that's the management of feedback. So the existing process is that we've got the standards inquiries mailbox and people can provide feedback through that, and that's then passed on to the relevant technical author. This works, but it's not ideal. It's time consuming for whoever has to man that mailbox. There's a potential for error or loss of feedback due to the manual handling and sharing of it. And there's no standard format for the feedback, so there's inconsistent quality of the feedback received. Therefore, there's a need for an enhanced tool and process to collect and manage the feedback received on standards. So what have been developed is a form which is hosted on the Standards for Highways or will be hosted on the Standards for Highway website to gather the feedback, and that will then automatically direct that feedback to the relevant person by creating a Jira ticket. This form will collect 4 types of feedback, as you can see on the screen. So firstly, general queries, general ideas, requests for background information, and then challenges to specific documents. And it's that 4th point that I'll expand on the next slide, as that's most relevant to the document maintenance process. So in time, the standards inquiry mailbox will be replaced by this new channel to collect feedback in a consistent and an organised manner. That should improve the quality of the submissions, as well as helping to categorise the feedback received and direct it more quickly to the relevant owners and keeping track of it as it goes through the system. So on this slide, as promised, I'll expand on that item 4, challenges to specific documents. So the bullet point list you can see is different types of feedback that might be received that's relevant to a specific document. So maybe there's a suspected error in the clause, maybe there's a gap in the content, possibly someone's noticed some inconsistencies between documents, or the content doesn't reflect the latest legislation or standards or the latest practice. The other area of feedback that could be received is opportunities. So opportunities to harmonise content with other clients, opportunities to add outcomes from research and development, opportunities for innovation and improvement, and opportunities to add alternative approaches. So these are some of the types of feedback that could be provided through that item 4. So if I move on to the next slide. This slide here is just showing you how a standard user might provide feedback. So they go to the DMRB website, the Standards for Highways website, and in the top right there would be an icon that they could click on, which would bring up the form that you see on the left of this page. First question they're asked is what type of feedback you're providing. So those are the 4 areas that I showed you on the previous slide. And the 5th one is the follow-up on previous feedback. When a user clicks specific challenges to a clause or clauses, that will then initiate a drop-down list where they identify exactly which document they have a comment. And then there's various boxes for them to fill out to provide the feedback in a consistent format. So that's just to show you where the feedback comes from. you're probably interested less on how to provide feedback and more on how that feedback flows through the system, how it comes to you and how it's addressed. So on the screen here, we've got a visual representation of the JIRA process for feedback management, and I'll just talk you through this flowchart now. So at the top, you can see the start, where the MS form on the website is used to capture feedback, as we've just seen. The form is submitted, and a JIRA item is then automatically created against the relevant epic, and the technical author is notified. That then moves into the JIRA stage, new feedback item. At this stage, the assignee reviews the feedback item and responds to the sender, thanking them for their feedback and explaining how it will be addressed. A couple of points on this aspect. Assignees are typically the technical author for DMRB or MCHW documents, or tag members for general queries and ideas. The email to be used, I'm not expecting you to use your individual email address, there'll be a generic no reply email that will be released as part of the website launch in April 2022. So once you've responded to sender, that moves into the bucket responder to sender. And that just means people that provide feedback know they've been heard, kind of aren't wondering where their feedback has disappeared into the ether. So at that stage, you have a choice between either closing out the feedback or putting the feedback item on hold. And I'll talk you through firstly when a feedback item would be closed out and when it might be put on hold. So feedback items can be marked as closed if no change is needed, or if a change is needed and it's something you can initiate straight away. So you initiate a document change through the standards governance process, and that process then is off and running, and you can then record that change number on against this feedback item, so you know that that feedback is being addressed through that change, and that then moves the ticket along to done, and that's the end of the process. Maybe, however, you're not in a process at a point where you can immediately initiate a change to the document, and that could be when your feedback item is put on hold to be addressed at a later stage. So if, for example, maybe it requires a major policy change, change to requirements, or change to advice or editorial, and these can't be addressed straight away for whatever reason, but they will be at a later stage incorporated into a change of the document. And these feedback items that have been put on hold need to be reviewed as part of the document review. They can't be put on hold forever. And once they are taken off hold, the feedback's closed out, that's process is done. Just the final point to share, the TSC should be used as a platform to share and discuss any changes arising from feedback and the opportunities for innovation. So before we move on, just a little bit of additional information on feedback management around the rollout of the system. So the new website that will be launched in spring 2022, and from now until the launch of the website, the MS form won't yet be available, that's hosted on the website, but TAG will be creating JIRA items from the feedback received through the standards inquiry mailbox. This will allow any niggles to be ironed out before it goes live, as well as giving you a bit of time to familiarise yourself with the new system, receiving feedback items as JIRA notifications. Anyone sending an email in this time will get a kind of auto response informing them of the new form coming soon. Once the website's launched, anyone that uses the form will trigger a JIRA item to be automatically created, which will come to you as applicable. Anyone using the mailbox will get an automatic notification kind of encouraging and redirecting them to the MS form on the website. At this time as well, there'll be a new email address made available for you to use to reply to senders. Individual emails will no longer need to be used for that purpose. So we're now on to the final aspect of document maintenance process, which is the routine change management. So this is the process for managing changes needed to the document and for bringing the documents up to date. So by way of a quick refresh, routine changes are processed through the workflow using the categories A, B, C and D as shown on the screen here, and they're managed in accordance with the standards governance process. If you need a refresh on this, please refer to the MDD and further guidance and training videos hosted on the CARS help page. So I'm now briefly going to talk through the example of changes arising from a document review and how they are managed. So you undertake your document review, as discussed earlier, and maybe the outcome of that is no changes needed to the document. Your document is confirmed up to date, and that's you done until the following document review is required again. However, if your document review identifies that a change is needed, you'll generate a change item, so under the appropriate category, and action that change as soon as possible using the JIRA workflow standards governance process. Your document will then be published as a new version and will be confirmed up to date. Any changes that are identified from a document review, they can't be deferred. They need to be, even if they're considered non-urgent, they need to be addressed as soon as possible. This ensures that the documents are brought up to date on a 5-year cycle and errors don't keep carrying forward. So now we're going to talk through what happens with changes arising from feedback. So firstly, you review your feedback item and maybe you establish no changes needed, and that's that. However, if a change is needed, there's a few different paths that can be taken. So firstly, you could decide to action the change item immediately. So you create the change item and that's actioned as soon as possible. That could just be published and that's that. The document's not necessarily up to date, but you've actioned that change, that specific change that has followed from the feedback item. However, you might decide at this point, given you're publishing a new version anyway, to undertake the document review now. So you undertake the document review and address all the associated actions with that. And ultimately, that then leads to publication of the new version and the document is confirmed up to date. Now, another scenario, once a change is needed, is you could decide to defer the change. Changes might be identified as non-urgent, where the risk of deferring the change is acceptable and it's been agreed with the TSC chair. If that's the case, that justification should be recorded on JIRA through the feedback management system that we saw earlier. At some stage, that change item, a change item against that document will be created, and that change will be actioned alongside other changes identified. So maybe you've decided to merge it with other changes, or if there are no other changes, the change needs to be undertaken as soon as possible after the document review in the appropriate category. That then leads to the document being published as a new version, and because that's followed a document review, the document is confirmed up to date. So to illustrate what we've just been seeing on the last two slides, I'm going to talk through an example of document maintenance using an example of routine document review, so without any feedback involved. So start with your new document, so it's been published, and at that stage it's completely up to date. Once a document's first published, there's a maximum of 4 years before the first document review needs to be undertaken, which is what you can see on this slide. So the document's published, and no more than 4 years later, a document review is undertaken. Now, say in that case, no change is needed at the document review, and the document is declared up to date. And then a maximum of 5 years later, the next document review is due. Now, if we all did our document reviews at their maximum time frame, we'd end up with some years being peak years for document reviews. So 2019-2020 was the peak year for new DMRB publications. So 4 years after that, 23-24, and 5 years after that, 28-29, would result in peak years for DMRB document reviews. Therefore, doing your document reviews not right at the end of those maximum years, spreading them out is to be encouraged. Now, if we look at the example of a document review where a change is needed, so a change is needed, the document review is then published to address all the actions, and it's then declared up to date. And then again, maximum of 5 years later, document review is undertaken. So see those together, two possible paths that could be followed following a document review. And then that process continues on into the future, and documents will be continued to be kept up to date through that process. So we've just seen there the basic document review process. Now we're going to look at the situation where feedback is provided halfway through the process. So see here, say a couple of years after the document's been published, some feedback is provided that results in a change being needed. One possible scenario is that the document change specifically related to that feedback item is published, but no document review is undertaken. In this case, the date of the document review is not affected, so the new version is published, but the next document review should be no more than 4 years after the document publish date. And that's because the document change that was published was only relating to that aspect of feedback provided, and there has been no review to ensure the document as a whole is up to date. Now, in the third case that we have on the screen now, this is considering the situation where feedback is provided and a document review is undertaken at that stage. So we've got our new document, it's been published, it's up to date, and as before, feedback has come along, say a year after it's been published, and it's been identified that a change is needed. At this stage, a document review is undertaken, and as soon as possible following that document review, the document change is published addressing all the actions. Now that triggers a reset of the document review time because we've just done a document review, so we know the document is up to date. So that resets the counter, and then no more than 4 years after that, the next document review is needed, and the process goes on with feedback being incorporated as and when. This slide here shows you the data that's being reported on a monthly basis to keep track of the DMRB and the MCHW progress and status. So on the slide here is an exemplar of a monthly report for the DMRB to show you the sort of data that's being recorded on a monthly basis, so things like the average age of the DMRB documents and the number of document reviews undertaken or forecast to be undertaken in the next few years. This data is reported monthly, and it's shared at the business management meetings where the programme office shares information with the directors of each division. Just to give you a bit of an overview of what's going on behind the scenes with the progress reporting and monitoring. So this slide summarises the role of technical authors in the context of document maintenance. So technical authors are responsible for ensuring document reviews are completed on time for their document. They're also responsible for reviewing and responding to feedback on their documents within the required timescales, and they're responsible for managing the changes as needed to their documents. Technical authors report to the TSC chair regarding the status of their documents as needed, and engage with the TSC regarding governance of changes. They also engage with the TSC regarding technical discussions and opportunities for innovation relating to their documents. This slide covers the role of the TSC chair. So there's no changes to established responsibilities. So the TSC chair is responsible for planning and delivering TSC meetings and activities. They're responsible for monitoring the status of documents and for engaging with technical authors, checking that document maintenance actions are undertaken when needed. TSC chairs take decisions relating to document maintenance, and they manage changes to documents through the standards governance process. The TSC chair also engage with the innovation team regarding potential innovations. Before we move on, let's do a quick test to check our understanding of the session. The following slides will alternate question and answer, so take a moment to think about the questions and think about the answer before moving on. The first three questions: who is responsible for undertaking a document review? Is it the technical author or the TSC chair? Second question: what is the deadline for the first document review of a new document first published in March 2020? So that'd be March 2024 or March 2025. And then the third question: what is the deadline for the second document review if the first document review is completed in March 2024? So would that be March 2028 or March 2029? So when you're ready, move on to the answers. So the answers for those questions. So the first question, a technical author is responsible for undertaking a document review. Second question, the deadline for the first document review, if it's published in March 2020, is March 2024, and that's because there's a maximum of 4 years before the first document review once a document is first published. Whereas the deadline for the second document review, this is the third question, if it's completed in March 2024, would be March 2029, and that's because for every other review it's a maximum of 5 years. So the 4-year is only applicable for a document that's first published. Otherwise, it's a maximum of 5 years before a document review is undertaken. So on to the next set of questions. So can document reviews be completed before the deadline? Yes or no? Does a document review have to include drafting and implementing the required changes? Yes or no? And can the required changes from a document review be deferred? So as before, stop this webinar, take a minute to think about the answer, and then continue listening. So on to the answers. First question, can document reviews be completed before the deadline? Yes, absolutely they can. That deadline is a deadline. It's the last possible date a document review can be undertaken. A document review can be undertaken any time before then. Next question, does a document review have to include drafting and implementing the required changes? No. So a document review identifies required changes, which then need to be implemented as soon as possible, but the document review is complete once those changes have been identified. So can the required changes from a document review be deferred? No. So once a document review has been undertaken, if there are changes needed off the back of that, they need to be implemented as soon as possible using the standards governance process. So now moving on to questions around feedback management. So the first question, feedback items can be marked as closed when no change is needed. Is that true or false? Second question, when changes are needed, feedback items can be marked as closed if the changes have been incorporated into a change item and the change number has been recorded on JIRA. Is that true or false? And then the final question, I can put a feedback item on hold if, and then select all that are relevant. It requires a major policy change to be incorporated into a change. It requires a change to requirements to be incorporated into a change. It requires change to advice or editorial to be incorporated into a change. It is about to be covered as part of a document review, or it is to be covered as part of a document review, or it is an error that impacts on safety. So which of those are reasons for putting an feedback item on hold? So stop the webinar, take a minute to think about the answers, and then continue listening. So moving on to the answers. So feedback items can indeed be marked as closed when no change is needed. Second one, when changes are needed, feedback items can be marked as closed if the changes have been incorporated into a change item and the change number has been recorded on JIRA. Because that's now been picked up through that change item, you can close the feedback item. And the third one, the first 4 of the list are relevant reasons for putting a feedback item on hold. All of them mean that the output from that feedback item will be incorporated later into a change and no later than after the document review. However, if it is an error that impacts on safety, that requires urgent change, so that can't be put on hold. Right, a couple more questions on feedback management. So a new MS form will be available to collect feedback from the DMRB website. Is that true or false? And the fifth one, will you be using your individual email address to reply to senders of feedback? So take a moment to think about the answers, and then when you're ready, move on. So a new MS form will indeed be available to collect feedback from the DMRB website, and this is replacing the standards governance, the standards inquiry email address. You will not be expected to use your individual email address to reply to senders of feedback. There will be a new reply email address provided from April. Right, moving on in the quiz, we are on to tests on relating to routine changes. So first question, a change is needed to a recommendation clause in response to feedback, but the change is justified to be non-urgent. What category would the change be in? Category A, B, C, or D? And the second question, an error is identified to a requirement clause that could affect safety. The document review deadline is in 2 years. May this change be deferred by 2 years and addressed with the document review? Yes, because it's more efficient, or no, because it could affect safety. So stop this webinar, take a minute to think about the answer, and when you're ready, continue listening. So moving on to the answers then. So a change is needed to a recommendation clause in response to feedback, but the change is justified to be non-urgent. This change would be category C. The fact it's non-urgent is irrelevant. It's the fact it's a recommendation clause makes it a category C change. The second one, change is identified to a requirement clause that could affect safety. Now, because it could affect safety, it can't be deferred to the next document review. It needs to be addressed immediately. So the answer is B, no, because it can't be addressed with the document review because it could affect safety. So last set of questions on routine changes. So a category D change is needed in response to feedback, but the change is justified to be non-urgent. May this change be deferred until the next change is needed or the next document review? Yes or no? Question 4. A non-urgent change was identified a year ago and deferred. The document review deadline is in 2 years' time, and it is decided to carry out the document review early. Following the completion of the document review, no other actions are identified. When should the change be made? So as soon as possible after the document review, in 2 years, or never. So stop this webinar, take a minute to think about the answer, and when you're ready, continue listening. So the answers to those two questions. So a category D change is needed in response to feedback, but the change is not urgent. May this change be deferred? Yes, because it's not urgent, the change may be deferred until the next document review. Now, so we take that change, it's a non-urgent change, it was identified a year ago and deferred. The document review deadline is in 2 years, but it's decided to carry out the document review early. Following completion of the document review, no other actions are identified. When should this change be made? Now that change should be made as soon as possible after the document review. It shouldn't be deferred. The document review is the time to carry out any changes that have accumulated. So we'll now move on to looking at the benefits of the enhanced document maintenance process. So the benefits of the enhanced approach to document maintenance. They're listed there on the screen, and I'll just run through them now. So the new approach provides better visibility of the status of document maintenance and which ones are being well maintained. And it provides an ability to track when documents were last reviewed, so you can know exactly how up-to-date a document is. The new process also incorporates documentation of decisions about potential changes to documents and their timings, so you can see a full record of how documents have been maintained, which changes have been made and why. Now the feedback management process, that should hopefully increase engagement from users in challenging standards and driving innovation. And that process for keeping track of all the feedback items and ensuring they're all addressed will help improve the management of risks identified through feedback. And then on the programming side of things, that routine cyclical nature of reviewing the documents should help improve the ability to manage resource demand for maintaining documents. You've got full visibility of the document reviews that are coming up. And finally, we'll move on to looking at the key dates and the available support. The key dates for the rollout are on the screen here. So back in November, there are a couple of awareness sessions for the devolved administrations and the TSCs. Then there was a trial period for the document review template. February 2022, the process was rolled out. So the MDD rules were updated. There's the training technical authors on governance rules, which is this recorded video, training on the use of JIRA, which is another recorded video, and a leaflet for the devolved administration staff. Then the rollout of the new website to include that link to the MS form for the feedback, as we talked about earlier, that's happening at the end of March 2022. This slide provides a list of the various support that will be provided for implementation of the document maintenance process. So as we've already mentioned, the MDD will be updated, and that will include a template developed for document reviews. So you can use that as you're doing your document review, and hopefully that is helpful. All the key components of the TSCS, so that's things like JIRA, CARS, Index Manager and website, will be updated to support document maintenance, to support the process set out in the MDD. There'll be various training material made available, so for example this PowerPoint, and you can find other support on the CARS help pages. Then TAG staff are always available to answer any queries and also to receive any feedback. Feedback is always gratefully received, particularly if you have ideas for improvement. And then if you'd like to discuss anything, or if you have any questions you'd like to talk through live, then there are drop-in sessions, weekly drop-in sessions. They're currently, as of February 2022, held on Tuesday afternoons, and you should have the invite from Becky Ansell for those. And then the last couple of things to help with programming. So the TSC chair are to inform the TSC, including the devolved administration representatives, about prospective changes to documents in a timely manner. And the programme of updates will be shared with the DAs, and that will include which DMRB documents have national annexes.
So that takes us through to the closing remarks. At the start of this presentation, I did present these objectives for today. So we set 2 key objectives to provide training for document maintenance process, including the rationale behind the enhancements which have been made, the 3 components of the process, benefits, key dates, and available support. And we also set as one of the objectives to provide visibility and early trials for tools which will be launched officially at the end of March this year. And I'm talking about here the new JIRA functionality related to feedback process, which is associated with the MS form on the new website. There are 5 key conclusions from this training. First of all, we have reviewed and enhanced the current document maintenance process, and the main goal of that has been to help you, technical authors, keep documents up to date. This is one of the 2 RIS2 obligations on SCS, keeping the DMRB up to date and refreshing the MCHW. So these new rules for document maintenance at the moment applies for the DMRB, of course, but in due course they will also apply to the MCHW once the overall refresh program has been completed. There are 4 key enhancements which we have introduced. Firstly, we have developed and implemented a new document review process with a specific focus on document reviews, a new checklist, which I presented earlier today, which will help identify areas where documents have to be updated, and then the relevant changes will be implemented through the routine changes process, the categories A, B, C, and D. Rebecca presented the improved feedback management process, the new website with the associated MS form, which will be launched towards the end of March this year, and the new Jira functionality, which will help create Jira items that you can use to keep track of feedback received on your own documents. We have integrated the concept of document reviews and feedback management with the wider management of routine changes, which are processed through the standards governance process using the categories of change A, B, C, and D. And we have also implemented all the relevant updates to Jira to support the above enhancements. You as technical authors have got a key role to keep documents up to date, as presented earlier. But you're supported in this endeavor by the TSC chairs and relevant secretariat who oversee the status enhancements, engagement, decisions, and governance related to document maintenance. TAG is also here to support the overall governance and provides assurance. So by the end of today, we hope that you have understood the key components of the enhanced document maintenance process. You understand your key role as technical authors for keeping documents up to date. You're ready to process documents through the enhanced document maintenance process, and also ready to start familiarizing with the new Jira items and issue types which have been introduced but will be rolled out officially towards the end of March this year. Please inform TAG of any queries or issues you may find and contact Kurt and Becky, who will be available to provide support as relevant. Thank you very much for your attention and support. We hope that you found this training useful and will help you to start implementing the new document maintenance process for keeping the DMRB up to date. Thank you.